Claudia Wilson's fingers trembled as she arranged the faded newspaper clippings on her desk. 23 years of searching, of hoping, of refusing to believe what everyone else had accepted long ago. The evening light cast long shadows across her study, illuminating walls covered with maps marked with red pins, timelines scrawled on yellowing paper, and photographs, so many photographs, of 4 smiling faces frozen in time. The sudden ring of her phone cut through the silence. Claudia glanced at the clock. 9:17 p.m. No one called this late with good news. "Hello?" Her voice sounded small in the quiet room. "Ms. Wilson, this is Detective Hargrove from the Nebraska State Police." Claudia's heart stuttered. For years, she'd imagined this call, dreaded it, longed for it. "We found something at an old farmhouse outside Red Willow." The detective's voice was measured, careful. A construction crew was installing a new septic system and discovered remains. The room tilted. Claudia gripped the edge of her desk. Human remains, 4 individuals, in an old sealed septic tank. Her eyes drifted to the photograph directly in front of her, Marjorie's family at their last Christmas together. Leonard with his arm around her sister, Tessa and Owen, kneeling in front with matching sweaters and gap-toothed grins. "How soon can you come to Nebraska?" the detective asked. The last time Claudia had seen them was at her driveway, waving goodbye as their green Ford Country Squire pulled away. Marjorie had rolled down the window, shouting over the engine, "We'll call from Denver!" Leonard honked twice, their signal since childhood that everything would be okay. But nothing had been okay since July 18th, 1979. "I'll be there tomorrow," Claudia whispered. For 23 years, she'd lived in the limbo of not knowing. Now the truth was emerging from the earth itself, buried in a septic tank in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. Welcome to Last Seen Stories. If you're watching from somewhere where family road trips are a tradition, drop your location in the comments below. And if you're new here, subscribe to join our community of mystery solvers as we uncover the truth about the disappeared. As Claudia drove through the night toward Nebraska, memories flooded back, not the agonizing ones that had dominated the last 2 decades, but the warm moments that defined the Halversons before they became a headline. Leonard had been a science teacher at Washington High School in Cedar Rapids. Tall and lanky with perpetually tousled brown hair, he'd been the kind of teacher students remembered decades later. His classroom was a wonderland of rocks, fossils, and mysterious contraptions he built himself. At home, classic rock was always playing. Creedence Clearwater Revival, the Eagles, Led Zeppelin. He'd play air guitar in the kitchen while making Sunday pancakes, making Tessa and Owen collapse in giggles. "Science is just paying attention to the world's magic," he'd always say. It was his mantra, printed on a hand-painted sign above his classroom door. Marjorie was his perfect counterbalance. As an ER nurse, she thrived on order and preparation. She color-coded everything, grocery lists, family calendars, the kids' school supplies. Yet beneath her methodical exterior was a tenderness that made her beloved on the hospital floor. Patients would ask for Nurse Margie by name. That woman, Leonard once told Claudia, plans for every possible disaster and still believes everything will turn out fine. It's her superpower. Marjorie's journals were legendary in the family, detailed accounts of everyday life, complete with pressed flowers, ticket stubs, and observations about her children's growth. She'd started a special leather-bound one just for their Rocky Mountain trip. Tessa was 12 that summer, on the cusp of adolescence but still firmly holding on to childhood. She'd received her first camera for Christmas, a Kodak Instamatic that rarely left her neck. She'd spend hours arranging still-life compositions in the backyard or capturing candid shots of her family. Her bedroom walls were plastered with National Geographic photographs she'd carefully cut out and preserved. "I'm going to take pictures all over the world someday," she'd told Claudia the Christmas before, "and maybe be the first woman to photograph snow leopards in the wild." 9-year-old Owen was all movement and questions. Where Tessa was contemplative, Owen was kinetic, always climbing, running, exploring. He'd developed an obsession with astronomy that year, pestering Leonard with endless questions about black holes and supernovas. For his birthday, Leonard had built him a small telescope, and summer nights often found them in the backyard, tracking constellations across the Iowa sky. Their Cedar Rapids home wasn't grand. A modest 3-bedroom with faded blue siding and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. But it was alive with science experiments in the garage, impromptu dance parties in the living room, and late-night whispers between siblings who shared not just DNA, but genuine friendship. The Rocky Mountain trip had been years in the making. Leonard had mapped it out on the dining room table, surrounded by travel brochures and road atlases. Marjorie had created a detailed budget, saving a portion of every paycheck. The children had adventure jars, where they collected coins for special souvenirs. "The mountains will change how you see the world," Leonard had promised the children. "Some things you have to experience with your own eyes." None of them could have known that the mountains would never appear on their horizon. The Halversons left Cedar Rapids at dawn on July 12, 1979. Claudia remembered the morning vividly, the green country squire packed so efficiently that Marjorie had joked she could find anything in it, blindfolded. The wood-paneled station wagon had been Leonard's pride, despite its tendency to overheat on long drives. "She just needs a little extra love," he'd say, patting the dashboard like it was a faithful pet. The first postcard arrived 3 days later, a gaudy sunset over Nebraska's sandhills. Leonard's cramped handwriting covered every available space, made it through Iowa without incident, except for Owen spilling his entire cherry Slurpee on the map of Colorado. Stopped at the world's largest ball of twine, Marjorie claims it changed her life. Tessa took 37 photos today, and Owen spotted 3 license plates we needed for our game, spirits high despite the heat, heading to North Platte tomorrow. Marjorie called from a motel in Ogallala on July 16th. Claudia could hear the children splashing in the pool through the staticky connection. "We're making good time," Marjorie had said, her voice bright with the special energy of vacation. "Leonard found this little shortcut through some gorgeous countryside. Should put us in Denver by the 19th if all goes well." That shortcut would later haunt Claudia's dreams. The last communication was another postcard, this one showing a wheat field stretching to the horizon. "Nebraska is endless. Kids loving the open road. Found the most charming little town called Red Willow. Heading to a local camping spot tonight before pushing on tomorrow. Leonard says the air smells different here. Cleaner somehow. We'll call when we reach Denver." They never reached Denver. Instead, their final documented moments came from Ron Hastings, attendant at Diller's Gas and Grocery in Red Willow. In his statement to police, later recounted countless times to Claudia, he described the family in vivid detail. "Nice folks, not in any hurry. The missus bought a new map. Said theirs had some accident with a cherry drink. She got some gum too, Wrigley's spearmint. The husband asked about local camping, so I told him about Miller's Creek. It's just a little spot the tourists don't know about, good fishing. The kids were playing with this mangy stray dog that hangs around, the girl taking pictures of it, the boy trying to teach it tricks. Real nice family. Didn't think nothing of it when they drove off." Hastings remembered Leonard asking about a shortcut to Miller's Creek, one that would take them past some scenic farmland. "I drew him a little map on the back of his receipt. Left at the old grain elevator, right at the fork by Norgard's place. Can't miss it," I told him. Except I guess they did. Or something worse. The Halversons' station wagon turned left at the grain elevator, right at the fork by the Norgard farm, and vanished into the rippling heat of a Nebraska summer afternoon. In Denver, Leonard's cousin Walt and his wife had prepared the guest room and blown up air mattresses for the kids. They'd stocked the refrigerator with Tessa's favorite strawberry ice cream and borrowed astronomy books from the library for Owen. As July 19th came and went with no word, concern crept in. "They're probably just enjoying the camping," Walt had said on the 20th. "You know Leonard, once he finds a good fishing spot, he loses all track of time." By the 21st, Walt was calling motels along the route. By the 22nd, he'd contacted the Nebraska State Patrol. The initial missing persons report described the Halversons as overdue travelers. Their status was upgraded to missing under suspicious circumstances only after Leonard's credit card showed no activity for 5 consecutive days. Sergeant Dennis Reeves led the initial search, coordinating with authorities across 3 states. He started at the last confirmed sighting, Diller's Gas and Grocery. "In cases like this," he later told Claudia, "most times you find the family broke down somewhere or they changed plans without telling anyone. It's rarely anything sinister." But as days passed, the absence of evidence became evidence itself. No credit card usage, no witnesses past Red Willow, no distress calls from rural payphones. Claudia arrived in Nebraska a week after the disappearance, setting up command at the Red Willow Motor Lodge. She brought family photos, dental records, and a desperation that would become her defining characteristic over the coming decades. The breakthrough came on August 3rd when a fisherman discovered the abandoned country squire at Miller's Creek Campground. The station wagon was parked neatly in a designated spot, locked, with no signs of disturbance. Inside were 4 suitcases, a cooler with spoiled food, and camping equipment, untouched. "It looked like they'd stepped away for a moment and planned to return," Officer Reeves noted in his report. "No blood, no signs of struggle, no indication of what made them leave their vehicle and all their belongings." The most unsettling detail: Leonard's wallet was in the glove compartment, containing his driver's license and $43 in cash. Marjorie's purse sat on the back seat, her nurse's ID card visible through the open zipper. The search expanded. Helicopters swept the surrounding countryside. Volunteer teams combed through miles of cornfields and ravines. Dogs tracked scents that disappeared at the edge of the gravel road leading to the campsite. The investigation hit a wall of rural silence. Local farmers acknowledged seeing the station wagon pass, but not the family themselves. A few mentioned that the car had been driving slowly, possibly indicating mechanical trouble. As summer faded into autumn, the case settled into the particular purgatory of the missing. Not enough evidence to determine a crime, not enough closure to process a death. The Halversons became another tragic statistic, another family swallowed by the vastness of America's highways. The case made national news briefly, sandwiched between stories about gas shortages and political tensions. Then, like most missing persons cases, it faded from public consciousness, remembered only by those who couldn't afford to forget. Time has a way of moving both too quickly and too slowly when you're waiting for answers. For Claudia, the years after the disappearance blurred together, marked only by the seasons of searching. Every July she returned to Red Willow, retracing the family's last known movements, knocking on the same doors, asking the same questions. The local newspaper ran annual anniversary pieces. Halverson family still missing 5 years later, then 10, then 15. The Red Willow Gazette, July 1984. Sister of missing woman refuses to give up hope. The Cedar Rapids Chronicle, July 1989. A decade of mystery. What happened to the Halversons? Nebraska State Journal, July 1994. Cold case continues to baffle investigators. Claudia sold her home in Cedar Rapids and moved to a small apartment in Red Willow. "I need to be where they were last seen," she explained to concerned friends, in case they find their way back. The annual vigils began as community events with dozens of attendees holding candles at Miller's Creek. By the late 1980s, only a handful of people joined Claudia in her ritual of remembrance. Still, she persisted, standing in the fading light, whispering the names of her missing family into the Nebraska wind. There were false leads. A waitress in Wyoming claimed to have served the family breakfast in 1980. A psychic from Omaha insisted the Halversons were buried near an abandoned mine shaft in Colorado. A man in prison for unrelated crimes confessed to the murders, then recanted when asked for specific details. Each lead dragged Claudia through cycles of hope and devastation. Meanwhile, the Halverson home in Cedar Rapids stood empty. Marjorie's sister couldn't bear to sell it, couldn't bear to enter it. Neighbors took turns mowing the lawn. Mail was forwarded. Utilities were kept on at minimum levels. The house became a time capsule. Tessa's camera still on her bedside table, Owen's star chart still taped to his ceiling, Leonard and Marjorie's coffee cups still in the dish drainer. Technology evolved. By the mid-1990s, DNA databases were revolutionizing cold case investigations. Claudia provided samples, as did Leonard's parents and siblings. The Halversons' dental records were digitized and entered into missing persons databases. Their profiles appeared on early internet crime forums and missing persons websites. Still, the void remained. No bodies, no crime scene, no closure. The not knowing is often the hardest part for families of the missing. If this story resonates with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates true crime mysteries. Spring 2002 brought the kind of renewal that mocks the grieving. Wildflowers erupted across the Nebraska plains. Farmers prepared for planting. And at the old Norgard farm, vacant since Walter Norgard's death in 1995 and subsequently sold multiple times, a construction crew arrived to renovate the property for new owners. The farmhouse stood 2 miles from where the Halverson station wagon had been found. The 2-story structure had fallen into disrepair, its white paint peeling, its porch sagging under the weight of seasons. The new owners, a couple from Omaha, planned to restore it as a weekend retreat. "First thing we need is a proper septic system," the foreman Keith Daniels told his crew that morning. "Old farmhouses like this, the plumbing's always a nightmare." The excavator began digging where the blueprints indicated the old septic tank should be. The operator, Gil Mendoza, noticed something odd almost immediately. "The tank wasn't where it should have been," he later reported, "and when we did find it, it was sealed differently. Concrete poured over the access point, not the standard cover, like someone wanted to make sure it couldn't be opened." Using jackhammers, the crew broke through the improvised concrete seal. The stench that emerged was their first indication that something was wrong. "At first, I thought it was just an old septic system gone bad," Mendoza recalled. "But this was different, and then we saw something that looked like fabric." As they carefully widened the opening, workers spotted objects that had no business being in a septic tank. What appeared to be a belt buckle, then unmistakably something that looked like a small bone. Work stopped immediately. Mendoza called the sheriff's department. Within an hour, the construction site had transformed into a crime scene. Sheriff Dale Pritchard arrived first, followed by deputies, and eventually the state crime lab team. As they set up floodlights and began the painstaking process of excavation, word spread through Red Willow. By afternoon, a small crowd had gathered at the perimeter of the property, longtime residents murmuring speculations as officers strung yellow tape around the farmhouse. The initial retrieval revealed horrors beyond imagination, 4 skeletons, intermingled as if placed together. Fabric remnants that had somehow survived the years, denim, what might have been a woman's blouse, smaller clothing items, a child's plastic bracelet, the kind given out at amusement parks, its faded yellow still visible. And, most damning, a keychain bearing the worn insignia of Benton's Hardware, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Claudia was at work at the Red Willow Library when Sheriff Pritchard found her. His expression told her everything before he spoke a word. "We need you to come with us, Ms. Wilson," he said, his normally gruff voice gentle. "We've found something at the old Norgard place." As Claudia's car followed the sheriff's vehicle down the rural route, she passed landmarks she'd scrutinized for over 2 decades. The grain elevator, the fork in the road, and finally the farmhouse that had never been part of the original search. The property swarmed with activity, forensic technicians in white coveralls, officers securing the perimeter, a medical examiner's van parked near the excavation site. Claudia felt strangely calm as Sheriff Pritchard led her to a tent set up away from the septic tank. "We haven't removed everything yet," he warned, "but there are some items we'd like you to identify if you can." On a folding table covered with a white cloth lay 3 evidence bags. The first contained the keychain. "Leonard's," Claudia whispered, her finger hovering over the plastic. "From Benton's closing sale. Marjorie hated it, said it was too bulky for his pocket." The second bag held the remains of the plastic bracelet. "Tessa got this at Adventureland that spring." Claudia's voice cracked for the first time. She refused to take it off, even though it turned her wrist green. The third bag contained something that made Claudia's knees buckle, a small, water-damaged notebook with a leather cover. The medical examiner had carefully dried it, but many pages were fused together, the ink blurred beyond recognition. Still, on the first page, in Marjorie's neat handwriting, were the words, "Rocky Mountain Adventure, Summer 1979. "It's them," Claudia said, no longer able to maintain her composure. "It's them." The grim task of recovering and identifying the remains took weeks. Dr. Eleanor Wright, the state's top forensic anthropologist, led the team that carefully extracted each bone, photographing its position before removal. The septic tank, never used for its intended purpose, had created an unusual preservation environment, anaerobic and sealed from the elements, though still destructive over time. The human remains had undergone extensive decomposition, Dr. Wright explained in her preliminary report. However, the enclosed environment prevented the typical scattering by animals or weather that often complicates outdoor crime scenes. The bones told stories of lives ended violently. All 4 skulls showed evidence of blunt force trauma. The largest skull, presumably Leonard's, had a distinctive fracture pattern consistent with multiple blows from a heavy object. The smallest skeletal remains, determined to be Owen's, showed defensive injuries to the arm bones, suggesting he had raised his hands to protect himself. Claudia provided the investigators with dental records she'd kept in a fireproof safe for decades. X-rays from Dr. Harrison, the family's dentist in Cedar Rapids, confirmed what the keychain and bracelet had already suggested. The remains belonged to the Halversons. DNA testing provided final confirmation. Though degraded, enough genetic material remained for comparison with samples from Leonard's parents, preserved in the cold case file. "We can state with scientific certainty," the lab report concluded, "that the remains are those of Leonard Halverson, 41, Marjorie Halverson, 39, Tessa Halverson, 12, and Owen Halverson, 9. The recovery team also retrieved items that painted a partial picture of the family's final moments. A man's wristwatch, Leonard's Timex, stopped at 7:42. The face was cracked, but the inscription on the back was still legible. "To Leonard, all my love, Marjorie." Most significant was Marjorie's journal. Forensic document specialists worked painstakingly to separate the fused pages and enhance the faded ink. Much was lost forever, but fragments remained legible. July 17th, spending the night in Ogallala. Pool is chlorinated enough to bleach hair, but kids happy. July 18th, heading toward Red Willow today, Elle excited about shortcut to Miller's Creek. And most chillingly, a partial entry that appeared to be from later on the 18th. Car trouble just past the Norgard farm. Leonard trying to fix but needs parts. Man offering to help seems odd. Children uneasy around. The rest of the page was illegible, the ink dissolved by decades in the damp environment. It was the last entry Marjorie would ever make. When Sheriff Pritchard informed Claudia that the remains had been formally identified, she was sitting in her apartment surrounded by case files, a habit of 2 decades that now seemed futile. "They've been there all along," she said, her voice hollow. "Less than 2 miles from where everyone was searching. All this time, they were right there." The sheriff had no response to offer. Some truths are too brutal for comfort. "We'd like to release the remains for burial once the investigation is complete," he said finally. "We'll need your guidance on that." Claudia nodded, her mind already drifting to the Cedar Rapids Cemetery, where empty plots had waited beside her parents' graves, plots that would no longer be symbolic. 23 years, she whispered. 23 years they've been waiting to come home. With the family identified, investigators turned to reconstructing what had happened on that July evening in 1979. Detective Hargrove, who specialized in cold cases, led the effort to piece together the Halversons' final hours. The discovery of Leonard's timing belt and several car parts buried near the farmhouse driveway supported the theory that the family had experienced car trouble. The country squire's notorious overheating issues, combined with the summer heat, likely left them stranded near the Norgard property. Based on the evidence, we believe the family's car broke down as they were taking the shortcut to Miller's Creek, Detective Hargrove explained to Claudia. The timing belt was found with tool marks, suggesting Leonard was attempting repairs. The investigation then turned to Walter Norgard, the farm's owner in 1979. Known locally as a recluse with a volatile temper, Norgard had never been considered a suspect in the original investigation, simply because no one had known the Halversons had been near his property. "We've recovered items from the farmhouse attic that suggest the family was initially invited inside," Hargrove continued. 4 dinner plates were found wrapped in newspaper dated July 18, 1979. They'd been carefully preserved, almost as keepsakes. The dinner plates, a mismatched set with one smaller plate obviously intended for a child, had been hidden in a metal box along with other items: Tessa's camera, Owen's pocket knife, and Leonard's wedding ring. Most revealing were the fragments from Marjorie's journal that forensic technicians had managed to enhance. Between her last coherent entry and the illegible portions, they recovered a few scattered phrases. "Offered to drive Elle to town for parts tomorrow." "Children playing with old dog in barn while we wait." Something not right about this place. Photos of children on walls don't look like family. Man becoming agitated when Elle mentioned calling for tow. The final decipherable words in the journal: "Trying to leave now, need to get children out." From these fragments and the physical evidence, investigators constructed a likely scenario. The Halversons' car broke down near Norgard's farm. He initially offered help, inviting them into his home while Leonard attempted repairs. Something triggered the family's concern, perhaps Norgard's behavior, or something they noticed in the house. When they tried to leave, Norgard attacked, killing all 4 and then concealing their bodies in the unused septic tank. The concrete seal over the tank was poured after the bodies were placed inside, Hargrove noted. It was crude but effective. No one had reason to look there, and Norgard owned backhoe equipment that would have made the job possible for one person to complete. The horror of this reconstruction wasn't lost on anyone involved. The family had likely been killed inside the farmhouse, the blood evidence long gone, but the violence still echoed in the bone fractures preserved in the septic tank. The exact sequence, who died first, whether the children witnessed their parents' murders, how long the ordeal lasted, remained mercifully unknown. Some details were better left to speculation. Forensic science has come so far since 1979. What other cold cases do you think might be solved with today's technology? Share your thoughts in the comments. Walter Norgaard became the focus of the investigation, though he had died 7 years before the discovery of the remains. Background checks revealed a disturbing history that had never connected to the Halverson case. Born in 1937, Norgaard had inherited the farm from his father in 1965. He'd worked the land alone, rarely hiring help and avoiding social contact. His only arrest had been in 1971, a bar fight that resulted in another man's hospitalization. The charges were later reduced to simple assault. Norgaard was known to local law enforcement, Sheriff Pritchard acknowledged, but as a troublemaker, not a murderer. He'd get drunk in town occasionally, cause a scene, then retreat to his farm for months at a time. More concerning were the discoveries made during the renewed search of the farmhouse. In a locked room that the construction crew hadn't yet accessed, investigators found hundreds of newspaper clippings about missing children from across the Midwest. Some dated back to the 1960s, others as recent as the 1990s. None mentioned the Halversons. We're reopening at least 3 cold cases based on evidence found in Norgaard's home, Detective Hargrove informed Claudia. Photos of missing children with handwritten notes indicating locations and dates. We believe the Halversons may not have been his only victims. The most damning evidence came from fingerprint analysis of Marjorie's partially preserved journal. Despite the water damage, technicians were able to recover a partial print from the cover that matched Norgaard's, on file from his 1971 arrest. Interviews with elderly Red Willow residents who remembered Norgaard painted a picture of a man battling inner demons. Hank Diller, who'd owned the gas station where the Halversons were last seen, recalled Norgaard's peculiar behaviors. Walt would come in for supplies maybe once a month, always paid cash, never chatted, Diller told investigators. But he'd watch people, especially families passing through. Had this way of tracking them with his eyes that made you uneasy. I remember once he followed a family out to their car, just staring. When I asked him what he was doing, he said he was admiring their completeness. Odd thing to say. Ruth Garvey, who'd delivered mail on the rural route, remembered Norgaard differently. He was always working on something, fixing machines, building structures, had talent with his hands. But his place gave me the creeps. He'd installed all these locks on the doors, not just regular locks, but heavy-duty ones, like he was keeping something in, not just keeping people out. The investigation hit its most frustrating wall when they tried to establish where Norgaard had been after the murders. Bank records showed he'd made large cash withdrawals in the weeks following July 18, 1979. His farm showed reduced activity, according to neighbors, though no one had thought it unusual at the time. We believe Norgaard may have fled temporarily after the murders, Hargrove explained. Then, when no connection was made to him, he returned to his normal patterns. The perfect crime in a way. No one was looking at him because no one knew the Halversons had been near his property. By 1995, when Norgaard died of a heart attack at 58, he'd become increasingly reclusive. The autopsy report noted advanced liver disease consistent with alcoholism. He left no will, no family, no confession. He took the full truth to his grave, Hargrove admitted. But the evidence speaks clearly enough. Walter Norgaard murdered the Halverson family and concealed their remains in a way that prevented discovery for over 2 decades. The case would remain technically open. Murders have no statute of limitations. But with the primary suspect deceased and no accomplices identified, the investigation had reached its conclusion. The why would forever remain elusive, lost in the troubled mind of a man long dead. On a crisp autumn day in 2002, 4 caskets were lowered into the earth at Oak Hill Cemetery in Cedar Rapids. After 23 years, the Halversons had come home. The funeral drew hundreds, former students of Leonard's, patients Marjorie had cared for, classmates of Tessa and Owen, now grown with children of their own. They filled the church and spilled onto the lawn, many holding photographs of the family or small keepsakes that had connected them across the decades. Leonard's cousin Walt, now gray-haired and stooped, spoke of fishing trips and shared holidays. Leonard loved life completely, he said, his voice breaking. He taught science because he saw wonder everywhere. That's what I choose to remember, not how they died, but how fully they lived. Claudia stood beside the graves, accepting embraces from people whose faces had aged beyond recognition. She felt oddly at peace, the weight of uncertainty finally lifted from her shoulders. "It's different when you know," she told a reporter who approached respectfully after the service. "The not knowing was its own kind of hell. Now at least they're at rest, and so am I." The case changed how Nebraska law enforcement approached missing persons investigations. The failure to connect the disappearance to Norgaard's farm, so close to where the station wagon was found, led to new protocols for canvassing areas near abandoned vehicles. "We expanded our standard search radius," Sheriff Pritchard explained at a press conference. "And we've implemented better coordination between counties. The Halverson tragedy taught us that sometimes the answers are literally in our backyard." The Cedar Rapids house that had stood empty for so long was finally sold, the proceeds establishing a scholarship in Leonard's name at Washington High School. Tessa's photographs, developed from rolls of film found in the country squire, were displayed in a small exhibition at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. Snapshots of a journey that captured the beauty of the landscape but also, unknowingly, the final days of a family. For Red Willow, the discovery brought an end to the whispered theories that had circulated for years. The Norgaard farm was eventually demolished, the new owners unable to proceed with renovations after learning its history. The land returned to what it had been before, an empty stretch of Nebraska plains where the wind moved through the grass like secrets being told. Claudia remained in Red Willow. When asked why she didn't return to Cedar Rapids now that her search had ended, she responded simply, "I came here to find them. Now I stay to remember them." This land holds their story, the end of it, yes, but also the final chapters that completed their journey. On the anniversary of the discovery, Claudia visited the cemetery alone. She placed 4 stones on the shared headstone, a family tradition Leonard had started on their parents' graves. As she stood in the gathering dusk, she found herself recalling not the years of searching, but moments before. Marjorie's laugh as they shared coffee at her kitchen table, Leonard teaching the kids to skip stones at the lake, Tessa and Owen performing an elaborate play they'd written during a power outage. In the end, what remained wasn't the mystery, but the memories. Not how they disappeared, but how they had lived. 4 lives cut tragically short, yet somehow complete, in their connection to each other. A family whose bond transcended even the darkness of an unmarked grave. The Halverson family deserved better, and their story deserves to be remembered. Subscribe to Last Seen Stories for more cases that time shouldn't forget. Hit the notification bell to join us next week, and share this video to help honor the memories of those who vanished.